Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members of the court, my task this morning is to set out some of the facts underlying the dispute between Nicaragua and the Federal Republic brought before the court. I shall, of course, concentrate on those facts that are relevant for the request for provisional measures. Nicaragua has already explained the factual background in its application. Unfortunately, since then, the situation has evolved further, and in light of that, provisional measures are becoming increasingly more urgent and necessary. Mr. President, members of the court, you are already acquainted with the devastating situation in Gaza and the imminent risk to which the Palestinian people, children, women and men in Gaza, but also in other parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, is currently exposed. 10 days ago, you qualified the living conditions imposed on Palestinians as catastrophic and the most recent developments in Gaza as exceptionally grave. The court knows and has acknowledged that there was an imminent risk of irreparable harm to the rights of the Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts identified in Article 3 of the Genocide Convention. And you concluded twice that the situation was such as to justify provisional measures aimed at protecting the right of the Palestinian people in Gaza as a people. In fact, measures aimed at ensuring their sheer existence and survival as a group. You also considered that the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is at serious risk of deteriorating. Since the end of January, the situation has indeed worsened and deteriorated. Already on 16th of February, the court endorsed the grave concerns expressed by the United Nations Secretary General before the General Assembly and noted that, and I quote, "The most recent developments in the Gaza Strip and in Rafah in particular would exponentially increase what is already a humanitarian nightmare with untold regional consequences." Yet, what was then a desperate call for reason, action and change has turned into blatant and brutal reality. The situation has increased the nightmare. The nightmare is increasing every single day. The Republic of Nicaragua draw your attention to the escalation of the situation in Gaza in its application and its request for provisional measures, and again in the letter of its agent dated 7th of March. The Republic of South Africa reiterated it again in its request of 6 March. In your order of 28 March, you also acknowledged that the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip has deteriorated even further. Mr. President, members of the court, this is still the reality in Gaza. Only 2 weeks ago, the United Nations Secretary General, visiting Egypt and the border with Gaza, made the horrifying comment that, and I quote, "Looking at Gaza, it almost appears that the 4 horsemen of war, famine, conquest and death are galloping across it." And he continued, "Nothing justifies the abhorrent October 7 Hamas attacks and hostage-taking in Israel, but nothing justifies the collective punishment of the Palestinian people." End of quote. The world is aware of all of that, and the world cannot turn its eyes away. The risk, if this term is still appropriate, of irreparable harm to the rights of the Palestinian people in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and to live in dignity is very real indeed, imminent and grave. As recently as last Friday, the UNRWA director reported to the Security Council on the unconscionable brutality of the conflict and confirmed again the tragic reality that there is no protection of civilians in Gaza. While the world is witnessing the destruction of Gaza and its life, the situation in the remainder of the occupied Palestinian territory has been deteriorating too. Last February, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Palestine described at this bar the suffering of the Palestinian people throughout the occupied Palestinian territory, subjected to the colonization of their territory, to the racist violence that enables it, to the denying of their fundamental rights, to the most inhuman segregation and apartheid, to the negation of their very existence. Day by day, raids, airstrikes, violence against and illegal detention of Palestinians in the West Bank are intensifying. Members of the court, the Federal Republic was and is aware of the situation and in any event could not have ignored it. Despite the very many warnings, alarming reports and messages of the United Nations Secretary General, United Nations Special Rapporteurs, the International Red Cross, and even the European Union's High Representative, Germany continues to assure and implement full support to Israel for its war against Gaza and its population. Addressing the Bundestag on 12th of October 2023, the German Chancellor stated, and I quote, "At this moment, there is only one place for Germany, the place at the side of Israel. That is what we mean when we say that Israel's security is a German raison d'etat. Our own history, our responsibility arising from the Holocaust, makes it our perpetual duty to stand up for the existence and security of the State of Israel. This responsibility guides us." The Minister for Foreign Affairs said the day before, and I quote her, "Israel's security is a German raison d'etat. With this understanding, I have offered Israel all our support in every area." This was also confirmed by the spokespersons of the federal government and the Federal Foreign Office, who both underlined that solidarity with Israel is paramount. Germany's support to Israel in every area, and in particular in the form of supplying weapons of war, was immediate. On 12th of October 2023, the Federal Minister for Defense confirmed in Brussels that Germany had allowed Israel's air forces to use 2 Heron military drones for what he called Israel's defense battle. The widespread and indiscriminate destruction caused by unmanned aerial vehicles like these drones to civilians, to civilian infrastructure, to houses and homes, and to humanitarian aid workers had been widely reported. In early November, a representative of the Federal Ministry of Economy and Climate Protection confirmed that, due to the situation, the German government processed and decided on applications for the export of military equipment to Israel as a matter of priority. The German government had authorized for the year 2023 exports of military equipment and war weapons in the amount of more than 326 million euros. Although Germany was even before October 23 Israel's second most important supplier of military equipment, this figure shows that export licenses granted by the Federal Republic are more than 10 times as important as for the year 2022. Most of these licenses were granted in the second half of 2023, after the invasion of Gaza by Israel and the start of its war in the territory and against its population. Indeed, according to the official figures of the German government, until 30 June 2023, only licenses in the volume of 38 million euros had been granted. In other words, export licenses for military equipment worth almost 300 million euros had been delivered by German authorities as a matter of priority within and against the background of the specific situation of Israel's war in Gaza and against its population. This includes export licenses for weapons of war in the value of 20 million euros, such as 3,000 anti-tank weapons, which according to one manufacturer in Germany are a complete toolbox of shoulder-launched infantry weapons used against tanks, but also vehicles, structures and buildings, and persons. 500,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition, 44 propellant charges, a key component in artillery ammunition, and 239 ignition charges. These are weapons built to and aimed at destroying and killing. Or to quote from Germany's own definition, objects and substances capable of causing destruction or damage to persons or property, and of serving as a means of using force in armed conflicts between states. In early 2024, the German federal government continued to provide export licenses for military equipment and weapons of war. According to the data submitted by the government to the members of the Bundestag, these licenses concerned military equipment of a value of more than 9 million euros. And despite requests made by members of the Bundestag concerning more recent data, at the best of our knowledge, no further information has been made available by the federal government since the introduction of the present proceedings. Mr. President, although those figures are telling, they do not reflect the full picture of the military support provided by Germany and the German industry to Israel's war in Gaza. These figures do not include export of equipment that does not fall under the export license requirements. They do also not include supply of military equipment directly by Germany to Israel. And the German news magazine Der Spiegel revealed information about plans of the German government to deliver tank ammunition from the stocks of the German armed forces. Moreover, due to the very dense and intense cooperation between Germany and Israel, also in terms of military equipment and exports, a great part of the military machinery and equipment of Israel is, at least partially, from Germany and depends on supplies, motors, engines, and spare parts from Germany too. Israel saw 6 corvette warships built by the German group ThyssenKrupp and sold with the support of the German government in 2015, have been used since October against Gaza and its people. And German manufacturer Mercedes is under contract with Israel's armed forces, in particular for the delivery of tank carriers, and has speeded up its operation amidst the war. Of course, Germany could not and did not ignore the situation in Gaza, largely documented by the press, official reports, and statements. Germany could not and did not ignore the likelihood that its support, the military equipment and the weapons of war, would be used by Israel to bomb and kill thousands of Palestinian children, women, and men. These questions were raised time and again, and this from the very beginning of the large-scale invasion of Gaza. Already on 11th of October, the spokesperson of the Federal Foreign Office was asked very directly whether the military actions of Israel were in conformity with international humanitarian law. He eluded the question and replied that, and I quote, "Israel has the right under international law to defend itself against the current attack, the terrorist attack by Hamas. We support this right and we stand by Israel's side," end of quote. And he added simply in passing that, and I quote again, "Of course, even in this absolutely exceptional situation, the protection of the civilian population is a requirement of international humanitarian law," end of quote. On 8 November, the federal government was specifically asked whether, to its knowledge, Israel is fully complying with the relevant norms of international law international humanitarian law, and refugee law in its current military operations in the Gaza Strip. In its response, the government confirmed that under the relevant legal framework, export licenses must be denied if there is a clear risk that the military technology or equipment to be exported might be used to commit serious violations of international humanitarian law. And despite the numerous reports on the concrete situation in Gaza, which Germany could not have ignored, the government representative continued, and I quote, "Israel assures the German government that it is taking precautions to ensure compliance with the requirements of international law. The German government currently sees no reason to doubt this." Against the continuing reports on the catastrophic situation in Gaza, the German authorities seem to have finally started to doubt Israel's assurances. On 25th January 2024, the federal foreign minister declared that, and I quote, "Notwithstanding the right to self-defense, there are rules, and the international humanitarian law also applies in the fight against terrorists. Israel needs to respect these rules just like all other states in the world, even in the difficult environment in which Hamas is breaking them all and using people as human shields." However, irrespective of these assertions, and indeed the very clear risk that grave violations of humanitarian law and international law are committed in Gaza, recognized by your court, Germany has not suspended its military support. The Federal Republic, together with all other European Union member states, again expressed its concerns about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the suffering of the hostages, as well as the Israeli government's plans for a possible ground operation in Rafah on 19 February 2024. It recalled in this context the importance of ensuring the protection of all civilians at all times in line with international humanitarian law, and to respect the 26 January order of the International Court of Justice, which is legally binding. Yet again, no suspension of its military support for Israel. Germany did also not move after the Court of Appeal of The Hague concluded that there were many indications that Israel has violated the humanitarian laws of war, and ordered the Kingdom of the Netherlands to cease all actual export and transit of F-35 parts, with final destination Israel. The Canadian Parliament recalled that, and I quote, "Israel must respect international humanitarian law, and the price of defeating Hamas cannot be the continuous suffering of all Palestinian civilians." End of quote. The Canadian government stopped approving exports of military equipment like other states before. Germany did not. Members of the court, if Germany might not have doubted the assurances of Israel in October 2023 as it claimed then, this is simply not tenable anymore. On 24th March, the federal foreign minister referred to the hell of Gaza and the dire situation of people starving to death. She also underlined that military action has its limits in international humanitarian law. And during her visit in Tel Aviv, Ms. Baerbock announced that Germany will send a delegation to Israel to discuss questions of international humanitarian law because, and I quote, "as a signature of the Geneva Convention, Germany is obliged to remind all parties of their duty to abide by international humanitarian law." End of quote. And still yesterday, it was reported that a group of 600 German civil servants was calling on the government to cease armed deliveries to the Israeli government with immediate effect, exactly because, and I quote, "Israel is committing crimes in Gaza that are in clear contradiction to international law and thus to the Constitution, which we are bound to as federal civil servants and public employees. Nevertheless, Germany still has not taken the decision to suspend its military support and the export of military equipment to Israel. Rather, in a recent response to a series of questions asked by members of the Bundestag, the government reiterated its position that export licenses will be considered on a case-by-case basis and in light of specific circumstances. Members of the court, to put it simple, highest German officials have recognized that the situation in Gaza raises doubts about the respect of elementary rules of international law, and that these questions need to be addressed. Yet, while we speak, the export of German weapons and military equipment to Israel, likely to be used for committing these grave violations of international law, is continuing. The German government has also not made any declaration concerning the stop of its military support to Israel after the United Nations Security Council demanded an immediate ceasefire. Contrary to the Canadian or the Dutch governments, it has not decided to stop nor suspend its supplies of arms to the Israeli government, nor has it resumed its funding of UNRWA's humanitarian operations in Gaza. The fact that Germany is engaged in facilitating or improving humanitarian aid in Gaza and for its suffering people does not change the picture. It is indeed a pathetic excuse to the Palestinian children, women and men in Gaza to provide humanitarian aid, including through airdrops on the one hand, and to furnish the weapons and military equipment that are used to kill and annihilate them, and to kill also humanitarian aid workers, as most recently evidenced by the missile attack against vehicles and workers of World Central Kitchen, on the other hand. Humanitarian aid in itself cannot keep the hope for peace alive as demanded by Ms. Baerbock, in particular if the safety of those delivering this aid is not guaranteed and their work hampered. To take the words of the European Union High Representative Josep Borrell, and I quote, "If you believe that too many people are being killed, maybe you should provide less arms in order to prevent so many people from being killed. It is a little bit contradictory to continue saying that there are too many people being killed. Too many people being killed, please take care of people. Please do not kill so many. Stop saying please and do something." End of quote. Yet Germany continues to say please without doing what it is supposed to do. In fact, required under international law to do, stopping its support, in particular its military support, and ensuring compliance by Israel with international humanitarian law. Mr. President, this brings me to the last point I want to quickly touch upon. Germany did not only not do something about its military supply and aid, it also decided to suspend its contribution to UNRWA that is supposed to take care of people in Gaza. There is no question that Germany fully appreciates the importance of UNRWA for the Palestinian people in Gaza and elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territory. Before 7th of October 2023, Germany was by far one of the most important donors to the agency, its second most important contributor. After having suspended its development aid to the occupied Palestinian territory in October 23, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development released funds initially earmarked for UNRWA's operation in Gaza on 7th of October 2023. The Federal Minister recognized then that, and I quote, "UNRWA is the most important partner for providing assistance to the people in the Gaza Strip." End of quote. On 13th December 2023, the German authorities confirmed that the review of allegations of misuse was completed and that the safeguards are robust and that no indications of the misuse of funding have been found. They further explained and recognized the central role of UNRWA for the Palestinian people in Gaza, and I quote, "The first focus of the review was activities that ensure the provision of basic services for the people, especially for particular vulnerable groups. This is why the projects run by the UNRWA, which provide life-saving services, were first reviewed and approved, followed by projects under Germany's transitional development assistance, which are making a direct contribution towards services for civilians in the current crisis." End of quote. The central and vital role of the Agency for the Palestinian People and its sheer existence, fully recognized and endorsed by the Federal Republic, had also been recalled by the United Nations Secretary General. UNRWA was and remains the backbone of the humanitarian distribution in Gaza. No other organization has a meaningful presence inside Gaza, and there is no other organization that would be able now to replace UNRWA. This remains the case today, as recently recalled on last Friday in the Security Council and in the Human Rights Council. Nevertheless, and in full knowledge of the consequences, Germany suspended its funding of UNRWA's operation in January 2024 amidst still unsupported accusations against the agency, and this despite immediate action taken by UNRWA to address these accusations and Germany's previous own assessment of the robustness of the control mechanisms. The suspension of funding deprived the agency of $450 million, with no capacity to absorb this financial shock, in particular in the pressing situation of war raging in Gaza. UNRWA's Commissioner General urged, and I quote, "countries who have suspended their funding to reconsider their decisions before UNRWA is forced to suspend its humanitarian response. The life of people in Gaza depend on this support, and so does regional stability." End of quote. Germany acknowledged, while still authorizing supply of military equipment, that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic and the situation of the people there is becoming more desperate with each passing day. Yet it has not, to this day, resumed the funding of the operations of UNRWA in Gaza, which were needed more than ever. Nicaragua does of course welcome the decision of the German authorities to provide new funds to UNRWA's operation in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and the West Bank. But still, the much needed support for the agency's central and life-saving operations in Gaza remains suspended. This unjustified decision contributes to the suffering in Gaza, where children, women, and men are starving, a situation created by the attempts to ensure the defunding of the agency. According to UNRWA, it is lacking 35% of the forecasted income for 2024. For good reason, this court has considered on 28th of March 2024 that in view of the worsening conditions of life faced by Palestinians in Gaza, in particular the spread of famine and starvation, it is necessary to, and I quote the court, take all necessary and effective measures to ensure without delay, in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, members of the court, I thank you for your attention, and Mr. President, may I ask you to give the floor to Professor Alain Pellet.